Imagine an object tracking on a military radar screen. It's sitting there at 80,000 feet, right at the edge of space.
Right.
Then, I mean, in less than a single second, it just drops to sea level.
Boom. Just instantly.
Yeah, exactly. It just hovers right above the ocean surface.
Yeah.
And there is no sonic boom. There's no exhaust trail. There's no heat signature at all.
Nothing.
Right. And when the fighter jets finally arrive to intercept it, the object completely outmaneuvers our most advanced tactical aircraft, and then it just shoots back up into the stratosphere at Mach 20.
Which is just staggering to even think about.
It really is. Now, imagine you're the fighter pilot who just saw that with your own two eyes, right?
Yeah.
And you have to go back to your aircraft carrier and actually write a report about it. For decades, doing exactly that would basically be a career-ending move.
Oh, absolutely. It was professional suicide. You'd be grounded, probably given a mandatory psychiatric evaluation.
I was curious.
Oh, yeah. And your data would just be buried in some classified vault, never to be spoken of again.
Wow. And, well, that is exactly the kind of institutional blindness we are unpacking today. Because for you listening, and I know the way your mind works, you don't just want the sensational headline, right?
No, of course not.
You're someone who craves the actual mechanics of a mystery. You want the hard data, the physics, the psychology. You really want to understand how all these bizarre puzzle pieces fit together.
Because they do fit together, if you look closely enough.
Exactly. So today, our mission is to bypass all the usual, late-night sci-fi conspiracy noise surrounding unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAPs, and just look at the absolute hardest data available.
Which is so refreshing, honestly.
It is. We're doing a deep dive into the 2024 book, The New Science of UFOs, New Insights into an Old Mystery, and we're doing it through the lens of cognitive neuroscience, top-tier intelligence oversight, and integrative medicine.
And the rigor we can bring to this topic today is entirely dictated by the unparalleled caliber of the authors behind this research. I mean, we are not dealing with amateur investigators here.
Not at all.
We are dealing with Dr. Eric Hazeltine and Dr. Chris Gilbert. So Dr. Hazeltine is the former chief technology officer for the entire U.S. intelligence community.
Which is a massive deal.
Huge. He's the associate director of national intelligence. Before that, he ran the research directorate at the NSA. And even before that, he was the executive vice president of research and development for Walt Disney Imagineering.
Which is just a fascinating combination of skills, right? Like,
Yeah.
He essentially spent one half of his career mastering the absolute cutting-edge technology of illusion and human perception at Disney.
Right.
And then the other half of his career uncovering the most heavily guarded black-budget technological truths on the planet at the NSA.
It's the perfect resume for this exact topic. He knows exactly what our multi-billion-dollar surveillance networks can do, and, honestly, more importantly, what they cannot do.
Exactly. And his co-author, Dr. Chris Gilbert, brings this completely different yet totally necessary perspective. She's an MD and a PhD who spent her early career as a medical director for Doctors Without Borders.
Yeah, she operated in literal civil war zones. Mozambique, Sri Lanka. She managed a massive refugee camp in Mauritania.
So she has seen things.
Oh, she understands the human biological system under the most extreme, unrelenting physiological and psychological duress you could possibly imagine.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the core thesis they present right at the start is incredibly counterintuitive. They argue that to truly understand the phenomenon happening out there in our skies, we first have to understand the phenomenon happening inside our own skulls.
Yes.
We really have to start with the biological limitations of the human brain.
Right, because before we can look at the sky, we have to look at why serious, highly credentialed professionals have historically refused to even look at the radar data.
Yeah, why turn a blind eye?
Exactly. Within the intelligence community and the military, there is this pervasive, almost impenetrable psychological barrier known as the giggle factor.
The giggle factor, meaning that immediate, almost reflexive smirking or the derision and social stigma directed at basically anyone who brings up a UAP.
That's the one. It operates as a deeply ingrained psychological defense mechanism. To understand why this happens, we really have to look at the brain not as a passive camera that just records reality, but as a highly active prediction engine.
Okay, a prediction engine.
Yeah, from an evolutionary standpoint, your brain's primary job is to predict what is going to happen next in your environment, just so it can keep you alive. It builds a very rigid, localized model of reality based on classical physics.
Right, gravity pulls things down, solid objects can't just pass through each other.
Exactly. Things moving really fast take time and distance to slow down.
The basic laws of motion that we interact with every single day of our lives.
Right. So when the brain is suddenly confronted with raw sensory data that completely violates that predictive model like an object making a perfect right-angle turn at hypersonic speeds without decelerating,
Right.
it triggers acute cognitive dissonance. The anterior cingulate cortex, which is the part of the brain that detects errors, essentially sounds a massive biological alarm.
Cortisol spikes.
Exactly. The brain basically realizes, hey, if this data is true, then my entire model of reality is false, which means I cannot predict my environment, which means I am in mortal danger.
Oh, wow. So it's essentially a localized biological panic attack. The ego's operating system just encounters a fatal error.
Yes, that's exactly it. Rebuilding that fundamental model of reality requires a massive amount of metabolic energy and psychological bandwidth.
Okay.
And most people simply do not have that bandwidth available in the moment.
Sure.
So to rapidly return to what the authors call a low-stress comfort zone, the brain takes a biological shortcut. It unconsciously discounts the sensory evidence. It rationalizes it all away.
It says, that didn't happen. It was just an optical illusion or software glitch.
A practical joke, a weather balloon, whatever fits. And when someone else brings it up, the brain uses ridicule, the Beagle factor, to socially quarantine that threatening data.
Okay, wait, let me play devil's advocate for a second here. If I'm an intelligence analyst, right,
Yeah.
and someone brings me a report of a flying saucer, shouldn't I be incredibly skeptical? Like, isn't rejecting impossible data just good, rigorous science? I mean, if my computer firewall encounters an unrecognizable anomalous file, it doesn't just install it to see what happens. It quarantines or deletes it to protect the system. Why isn't the giggle factor just a healthy biological firewall?
That's a great question, but there is a vital distinction here between true scientific skepticism and psychological denial.
Okay.
True skepticism says, hey, this data appears to violate known physics. Therefore, we must rigorously isolate the sensors, test the calibration, and aggressively analyze the telemetry to find out exactly what caused the anomaly.
Right, you still look at the data.
Exactly. The giggle factor, however, says this data violates known physics. Therefore, I refuse to even look at the telemetry, and I will actively mock the radar operator who recorded it. Denial just avoids investigation entirely to protect the ego.
Okay, I see the difference. The firewall analogy works, but instead of protecting the computer, this biological firewall is literally preventing us from seeing that our entire network is being hacked.
Yes. What's fascinating here is that the danger compounds exponentially when that biological low-pass filter scales up.
What do you mean?
Well, it goes from an individual pilot's brain to the institutional policy of an entire intelligence agency. Dr. Hazeltine points out that this creates a massive self-imposed national security blind spot.
Which is honestly terrifying. Because if I am a foreign adversary, say I'm running a black budget weapons program in China or Russia, and I've developed this highly advanced disruptive drone technology that I need to test in the real world,
Right.
the absolute best place to test it is right in the middle of U.S. military training airspace. Because I know the U.S. military's own giggle factor will act as my camouflage.
Exactly.
If a Navy pilot spots my drone doing something weird, the pilot's commanding officers will ensure the report is buried just to avoid the stigma of hunting UFOs.
By weaponizing our own cognitive dissonance against us, adversaries can operate with near total impunity.
Wow.
But eventually, the sheer volume and quality of the data force the system to confront physical reality. The psychological firewall inevitably breaks down when the multi-sensor telemetry just becomes too overwhelming to rationally dismiss.
Which moves us directly from the psychological inability to look straight into the actual physical environment and the behaviors of these objects. We have to look at the hard data that finally broke that stigma.
Yes, specifically the 2004 USS Nimitz and the 2015 USS Roosevelt encounters.
Right.
These are the real watershed cases. We are looking at military-grade observations of objects that pilots describe as spheres, glowing orbs, dark triangles, and of course the famous smooth white tic-tac shapes.
Yeah, the tic-tacs.
And they're engaging in what the authors define as transmedium travel.
Okay, let's break down exactly what transmedium travel means mechanically, because it completely defies all of our current engineering paradigms.
So, transmedium travel is the capability to move seamlessly through completely different physical mediums, specifically the vacuum of space, the Earth's atmosphere, and the ocean.
All three.
All three, without any degradation in performance, speed, or structural integrity.
Okay, let's contrast that with our absolute best state-of-the-art human technology, just to really highlight the data gap here. Take an F-35 fighter jet.
The pinnacle of our tech.
Right. It is a marvel of aerodynamic engineering, but it is built exclusively for the atmosphere. It has wings to generate lift from air molecules. It has jet engines that require atmospheric oxygen to combust jet fuel.
Yep.
If you take an F-35 into the vacuum of space, the engines just choke and die instantly. And the wings are utterly useless because there's no air to push against.
Right. And conversely, if that same F-35 hits the surface of the ocean while traveling at, say, Mach 1,
It's game over.
it doesn't gracefully dive like a submarine. The density of water is roughly 800 times greater than air. Hitting water at that speed is mathematically equivalent to flying a jet directly into a solid concrete wall.
Ouch.
The titanium airframe would instantaneously shatter into thousands of pieces.
Yeah, I mean, we build nuclear submarines to handle the ocean, but they are built for extreme pressure, not for speed. They move at a crawl compared to a jet, and they are incredibly loud underwater.
Very loud.
But the UAPs tracked by the Nimitz Carrier Strike Group were observed dropping from tens of thousands of feet in the air, plunging directly into the Pacific Ocean without even producing a splash.
No splash at all.
And then just continuing to travel underwater at hundreds of knots.
It's mind-bending.
Yeah.
And while they're in the air, their performance metrics are just staggering. A human pilot in an F-35 wearing a highly specialized pressurized G-suit can withstand a maximum of about 9 Gs of force.
9 Gs?
Yeah, before all the blood is forced out of their brain, causing them to lose consciousness.
Yeah.
GLOC.
Right.
And the airframe itself will suffer catastrophic structural failure like. The wings will literally rip off the fuselage if it's pushed much beyond 13 to 15 Gs.
Yet the radar telemetry on these UAPs shows them executing instantaneous velocity changes, literally stopping on a dime from hypersonic speeds, making complete 90-degree turns while traveling at Mach 20.
Right.
The math on those maneuvers calculates out to hundreds, if not thousands, of Gs.
Furthermore, an F-35 generates a massive acoustic and thermal signature. When it breaks the sound barrier, it creates a concussive pressure wave, a sonic boom that can shatter glass on the ground.
Right, you hear it from miles away.
And its engines burn thousands of degrees hot, leaving a massive infrared plume. The UAPs, however, are completely silent. They produce absolutely no sonic boom at Mach 20.
Which shouldn't be physically possible.
It shouldn't. They have no visible flight control surfaces, no rudders, no wings, no exhaust trails, and absolutely no detectable means of traditional thermal propulsion.
Okay, let's stop right here. Because if the military radar is calculating thousands of Gs, basic physics dictates that any crash should be pulverized. We run straight into the F equals ma problem. Force equals mass times acceleration.
The classic Newtonian wall.
Exactly. At Mach 20, the instantaneous acceleration required to stop on a dime turns any known mass, whether it's titanium, carbon fiber, or human biology, into absolute soup. So why shouldn't we just assume the software is glitching? I mean, isn't it infinitely more probable that some advanced electronic warfare system is spoofing our radars, creating false ghost tracks, rather than a physical craft literally defying the fundamental laws of motion?
That is the exact analytical counterargument the intelligence community relied on for decades to maintain their comfort zone.
Right.
But Dr. Haseltine emphasizes that these modern encounters are not single-sensor anomalies. We are talking about highly sophisticated integrated sensor fusion.
Meaning they aren't relying on just one type of technology to see the object.
Precisely. In the Nimitz case, for example, you have the USS Princeton cruiser using its Aegis ANSPY-1 phased array radar. This is one of the most powerful radar systems on Earth. It's bouncing physical radio frequency waves off a physical target. At the exact same time, you have the E-2 Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft tracking it from above.
2 different radars.
Right. Then you vector in the F-18 fighter jets. The pilots establish a visual lock with their own eyes, the biological sensor.
So they actually see a physical object reflecting sunlight. They aren't just looking at a blip on a screen.
Yes. And simultaneously, the F-18s engage their ATFLIR pods.
Yeah.
This is forward-looking infrared. It does not use radio waves at all. It measures the passive thermal radiation, the heat, emitting from the object.
Okay.
All of these completely independent, distinct technological platforms, operating on entirely different principles of physics, are corroborating the exact same spatial coordinates, the exact same hypersonic speeds, and the exact same impossible maneuvers.
Wow. So you cannot have a synchronized, perfectly aligned software glitch across a phased array radar, a passive infrared thermal pod, and the optical biology of multiple human eyeballs all at the exact same millisecond.
You absolutely cannot. The centrifugation forces a profoundly uncomfortable conclusion here. The data is real, the objects are physical, and if they're physical, it means our fundamental understanding of physics, or our fundamental understanding of biological limits, is deeply, profoundly flawed.
Which takes us down an incredibly wild path, because if the G-forces involved in these maneuvers would instantly liquefy a human pilot, we have to ask the obvious biological question. Could any form of biology survive inside these crafts? Or do we just assume these are all unmanned artificial intelligence drones?
Well, this is where Hazeltine and Gilbert dive into the realm of astrobiology and extremophiles. They really challenge the inherently arrogant assumption that just because a human being cannot survive a 1,000 G turn, no living organism could.
Right. We use the human comfort zone as the ultimate metric for universal biological limits.
Which is scientifically myopic.
Hmm.
To prove this, they look at terrestrial extremophiles organisms right here on Earth that have evolved to thrive in environments that would instantaneously kill a human.
Okay, like what?
The most famous example, of course, is the tardigrade, the water bear.
Oh, I love those little guys. They look like microscopic, eight-legged manatees wearing hazmat suits.
That's a perfect description. They are microscopic invertebrates, but their resilience is almost supernatural. When exposed to lethal environments, tardigrades enter a state of suspended animation known as cryptobiosis.
Let's explain how cryptobiosis actually works mechanically, because it isn't just hibernation. It's a fundamental alteration of their cellular chemistry, right?
Exactly. When faced with freezing temperatures, extreme heat, or complete dehydration, a tardigrade will expel almost all the water from its body.
Just push it all out.
Yeah. It replaces that water with a unique sugar called trehalose, and these specialized intrinsically disordered proteins. These molecules essentially turn the inside of their cells into a solid glass-like state.
A glass state.
This vitrification prevents their cell membranes from rupturing and completely stops all metabolic processes.
So they basically turn themselves into biological glass. And because of this mechanism, scientists have literally taken tardigrades, dried them out, and subjected them to the actual vacuum of outer space.
Yes.
Zero atmospheric pressure, zero oxygen, bombarded by cosmic radiation.
And they survive. You just reintroduce water and they reanimate and walk away. But most critically, to our F equals MA problem, scientists have placed tardigrades into laboratory centrifuges and spun them up to incredible speeds.
Oh my God.
Because they lack a rigid skeletal structure and can suspend their internal fluids, tardigrades have survived thousands of Gs of force.
Thousands of Gs. The exact kind of instantaneous acceleration recorded on the Aegis radar data during the Nimitz encounter.
Yep, and they are not an isolated anomaly. The authors also examined Deinococcus radiodurans. This is a bacterium so resilient it has been nicknamed Conan the bacterium.
Okay, Conan the bacterium. How does a bacterium survive conditions that would kill everything else? What is the mechanism there?
Its primary threat is ionizing radiation. So if you expose a human to high levels of gamma radiation, the high-energy photons physically smash through the body, shattering the double helix structure of our DNA into thousands of disconnected fragments.
Which is terrifying.
Without the DNA blueprint, our cells cannot replicate and we die of acute radiation sickness. Deinococcus radiodurans experiences the exact same DNA shattering when exposed to radiation.
But it doesn't die.
No. It has evolved a highly specialized mechanism. Its genome is stored in a tightly packed toroidal or donut-shaped structure. It also keeps multiple backup copies of its entire genome.
Like having a backup hard drive.
Precisely. When the radiation shatters its DNA, a suite of incredibly fast, highly efficient DNA repair proteins immediately go to work. They use the backup copies as templates and physically stitch the millions of shattered DNA fragments back together in perfect order within a matter of hours.
So it constantly rebuilds its own source code in real time. That is wild. And the book also mentions radiotrophic fungi discovered growing inside the ruins of the Chernobyl nuclear reactor, right? Fungi that don't just survive the deadly radiation, they actively seek it out.
They do. They utilize a pigment called melanin, which is similar to what is in human skin, to capture high-energy gamma rays and convert that radiation directly into chemical energy for growth.
Wow.
They literally eat the radiation, similar to how a plant uses chlorophyll to turn sunlight into energy via photosynthesis.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When you lay out all that biological data, you realize how ridiculously narrow our perspective is. Humanity is essentially a goldfish swimming around in a tiny glass bowl on a desk.
That's a great way to look at it.
The goldfish looks out into the dry, air-filled room and firmly concludes that no life could possibly exist out there because there is no water on the other side of the glass. We are judging the absolute limits of extraterrestrial or anomalous life entirely by our own fragile human standards.
It forces a total paradigm shift. The authors ask you to stop imagining extraterrestrial life as just a human with gray skin and big eyes. Instead, we must consider that life across the universe might be incomprehensibly robust.
Right.
If biology on Earth, in our relatively calm, stable environment, can evolve complex mechanisms to survive the vacuum of space, thousands of Gs and nuclear meltdowns, what kind of biological architecture could evolve on a harsh, volatile exoplanet, or over a timeline millions of years longer than Earth's evolutionary history?
It reorients the entire deep dive. We stop asking, how do they survive the G-forces to get here? And we start asking, how do we expand our scientific definitions so we can even recognize them?
Exactly. The biology is theoretically possible, but we're still left with the physics problems.
Sure.
Even if an incomprehensibly robust organism is sitting inside that tic-tac, we still have to explain the lack of friction, the lack of thermal exhaust plume, and the complete absence of a sonic boom while traveling at Mach 20.
Right, which means we have to completely reimagine propulsion. We have to move away from our whole model of just throwing fire out the back of a tube.
This is where Dr. Haseltine and Dr. Gilbert delve into theories of exotic propulsion and gravity manipulation. They highlight the ongoing research of scientists like Dr. Charles Bueller.
He's the former NASA engineer, right?
Yes, who has been experimenting with electrostatics. Bueller's research explores how highly asymmetrical capacitors, charged with massive amounts of electrical energy, can theoretically create a localized force that pushes against space itself, altering the local gravitational field without expelling any mass.
But the real mind-bending concept they explore is the theoretical mechanics of a warp drive, the Alcubierre metric.
Yes. To understand a warp drive, you have to discard Newtonian physics, the idea of action and reaction pushing a vehicle through space. Instead, you have to look at Einstein's theory of general relativity.
Okay, space-time is a fabric?
Exactly. Which posits that space-time is not an empty void, but a flexible physical fabric that can be bent, stretched, and compressed by mass and energy.
So how does a warp drive actually function on a mechanical level? Because it sounds like straight-up Star Trek.
Theoretically, a craft equipped with a warp drive would use a massive ring of exotic matter with negative energy density to generate a localized, intensely powerful energy field.
Okay.
This field would violently contract or compress the fabric of space-time directly in front of the craft. Simultaneously, it would stretch or expand the fabric of space-time directly behind the craft.
Oh, I see.
And the craft itself sits inside a localized bubble of normal, flat space-time.
Okay, so the best analogy for this is when you are standing on one of those moving walkways at a large airport.
Oh, that's perfect.
When you step onto the belt and stand completely still, you aren't actually running. You aren't expending metabolic energy to move your legs, and you don't feel wind resistance pushing against your face. You are stationary.
Right.
But the space beneath you, the walkway, is physically moving you from point A to point B.
That perfectly illustrates the physics of the warp bubble. Inside that localized bubble of normal space, the craft experiences zero inertia. It isn't moving relative to its immediate environment. Space itself is flowing around it like water around a smooth stone in a river.
Which perfectly explains every single piece of anomalous radar data we just talked about.
Exactly.
If the craft isn't physically moving through the atmosphere, there is no air friction against the hull. It isn't pushing air molecules out of the way so it doesn't compress the air into a pressure wave.
Which means absolutely no sonic boom, regardless of how fast it travels relative to the observer on the ground.
And it wouldn't need aerodynamic wings for lift or a sleek pointed nose cone to cut through the air. It could just be a blunt, featureless cylinder like a tic-tac.
Precisely. The physics theoretically align with the observations. And this brings Dr. Haseltine to discuss what he calls breakaway defense science.
Okay, what is that?
Well, from his vantage point as the former CTO of the intelligence community, he notes that highly classified, black-budget physics research has historically operated decades ahead of standard unclassified academic physics.
Wait, let's stop and really look at that. Are we suggesting the U.S. government figured out warp drives in a basement somewhere?
Well,
Because if Lockheed Martin or the Department of Energy actually cracked electrogravitics or manipulated the alkybiometric inside a special access program, why are we still spending trillions of dollars building standard jet fuel burning F-35s? Why are we strapping astronauts to traditional chemical rockets to go to the moon if we have a silent anti-gravity tic-tac sitting in a hangar in Nevada?
that is the ultimate logistical question. Hazeltine answers it by explaining the paralyzing bureaucracy of innovation within special access programs, or SAPs.
Okay, the bureaucracy.
Yeah, to protect a world-changing technological breakthrough from relentless foreign espionage from Chinese or Russian spies, you have to lock the research down under the highest possible security classifications. You compartmentalize the data. You create a system where only a few dozen people on Earth know the full picture.
Need to know basis only. The propulsion guy isn't allowed to talk to the material science guy.
Exactly. But true scientific innovation requires massive interdisciplinary cross-pollination. It requires tens of thousands of engineers, software developers, metallurgists, and physicists constantly debating, testing, and sharing data.
Right, you need open peer review.
By hiding the technology in a hyper-compartmentalized SAP, you starve it of the intellectual oxygen it needs to mature from a theoretical prototype into a reliable, mass-produced, deployable product.
It's a catch-22. To protect it, you have to isolate it. But by isolating it, you ensure it never actually works properly.
And even if you could get it working perfectly, the geopolitical shockwaves of deploying it are too dangerous. If the United States suddenly retired its entire naval fleet and replaced it with 10 anti-gravity triangles that run on zero-point energy, the global fossil fuel economy would collapse overnight. Furthermore, our adversaries would instantly know that the physics are mathematically possible.
Right.
And they would mobilize their entire national economies to replicate the technology, setting off a new, incredibly destabilizing arms race.
Right.
So paradoxically, the extreme secrecy required to protect the technology guarantees it remains locked in bureaucratic purgatory forever.
That is deeply frustrating, but it actually makes complete strategic sense. However, before we conclude that every strange light in the night sky is either a black budget warp drive or an immortal space tardigrade,
Right.
we have to apply Dr. Hesseltine's intelligence background to filter the data.
We do.
Because the authors are incredibly rigorous about this. We have to weed out the noise. Not all UAPs share the same origin.
So far from it. They dedicate significant portions of the book to analyzing prosaic, conventional explanations. To find the true signal, you must aggressively categorize the noise.
And the first and honestly largest category is human and perceptual error. This leans heavily on Dr. Gilbert's medical understanding of how the brain processes visual inputs.
Right.
The human brain is remarkably susceptible to optical illusions, particularly in environments devoid of reference points, like the open ocean or a clear blue sky. A prime example is motion parallax.
Motion parallax is a monocular depth cue. If you are driving down a highway and looking out the side window, the trees right next to the road appear to be blurring past you at 70 miles per hour.
Right.
But the mountains far off in the distance appear to be moving very slowly or barely moving at all.
Right, because of the angle of observation relative to the distance. So if you are a fighter pilot flying at 400 knots over a featureless ocean and you spot an object, your brain desperately needs to know how far away it is to calculate how big it is and how fast it's moving.
Exactly.
But if it's just a balloon floating 500 feet away and your brain misinterprets it as a massive craft 5 miles away, the motion parallax will cause your brain to calculate that the object is traveling at impossible hypersonic speeds, when in reality, it's just drifting in the wind.
The brain hates ambiguity. When it lacks sufficient data, you'll literally autofill the blanks to create a cohesive narrative, even if that narrative is a complete hallucination.
Like the autokinetic effect.
Yes, the autokinetic effect is where a stationary point of light in a dark sky appears to dart around wildly simply because the human eye is making microscopic, involuntary movements.
Then you have to layer in complex atmospheric physics. Things like thermal inversions.
Oh, they're tricky.
Very. A thermal inversion happens when a layer of warm air traps a layer of cooler air near the surface. That temperature boundary can literally act like a massive mirror in the sky. It can conduct radio waves, creating false radar returns. Or it can visually reflect the lights of a distant city or a ship over the horizon, making it look like a glowing craft hovering silently in midair. And, of course, we have to acknowledge the deliberate fake CGI hoaxes, people launching LED drones to get views on YouTube.
But Hazeltine pivots from these mundane illusions to a much more immediate pragmatic threat, the foreign adversary hypothesis.
The idea that this isn't intergalactic is just geopolitical. It's the Russians or the Chinese.
He draws on historical precedent to show how foreign actors can completely leapfrog U.S. technological superiority while our intelligence agencies are looking the other way.
Like Sputnik.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In 1957, the U.S. establishment firmly believed they were years ahead in aerospace technology. Then suddenly, the Soviet Union launched the Sputnik satellite. It was a massive ontological shock.
Yeah.
A Soviet sphere was literally beeping as it orbited over Washington, D.C., and the U.S. had no capability to stop it. More recently, we saw the deployment of hypersonic glide vehicles by China, a technology that caught the Pentagon largely off guard.
So the theory is that an adversary achieved a silent breakthrough in drone technology. Maybe not a warp drive, but incredibly advanced battery tech, signature management, and electronic warfare spoofing. But let me challenge this focus.
Go ahead.
If we spend all our time aggressively trying to cram every sighting into the "it's just a Chinese drone" box, don't we risk throwing out the truly anomalous data? Aren't we just building a new comfort zone?
That's a fair point. But Hazeltine argues that the nuts and bolts geopolitical threat is intimately entangled with the truly anomalous threat, precisely because of our psychological vulnerabilities.
How so?
Consider this strategic scenario. Let's say a foreign intelligence service has developed a really good silent surveillance drone. They are fully aware of the American military's giggle factor. They know our pilots are terrified of reporting UFOs because of the stigma.
So they intentionally design their drones to look like UFOs.
Exactly. They build them as featureless glowing orbs or smooth tic-tacs. They use the UAP label as psychological camouflage.
Oh.
They can fly these drones directly over U.S. nuclear missile silos, naval training ranges, and sensitive bases. When the radar operators see them, the commanding officers, desperate to avoid the UFO stigma, will say, "Throw that data out, it's just a glitch, or it's just swamp gas."
The stigma itself becomes a weapon of mass espionage. We dismiss a very real terrestrial surveillance threat because it is dressed up in the clothing of science fiction. That is a brilliant and terrifying vulnerability.
It really is. But this leads us to a profound pivot in the research. Because regardless of whether an object is a highly advanced foreign drone using psychological camouflage, a rare atmospheric plasma, or something truly unknown from the depths of the cosmos, the act of encountering it leaves a profound, measurable, and often devastating impact on the human observer.
Which brings us to the physiological toll of the phenomenon and the core of Dr. Chris Gilbert's work. She introduces an entirely new medical framework called exopsychology.
Yes. Exopsychology is the study of how the human biological and psychological systems perceive, process, and react to encounters with anomalous, potentially non-human intelligence or technology. She applies her extensive medical background in trauma therapy to the study of the human UAP interface.
Right, and in her medical practice, she utilizes techniques derived from Gestalt therapy. Let's explain how this works mechanically, because it sounds a bit esoteric at first, but it is grounded in somatic psychology.
It is.
Gestalt therapy emphasizes the holistic experience of the patient. When Dr. Gilbert treats someone who has had a severe, unexplainable encounter, she doesn't just sit them down and ask, "Tell me what you saw in the sky." Instead, she asks them to focus on their physical sensations. She asks, if your body had a voice independent of your conscious mind, what would it say?
The mechanism here is vital. By asking the patient to separate their analytical ego from their somatic experience, she bypasses the brain's predictive firewall.
The comfort zone.
Exactly. The conscious mind might be trying to rationalize the encounter, but the body stores the raw trauma. And witnesses of these close encounters report incredibly intense, acute physical symptoms.
We are talking about sudden, crippling nausea, temporary paralysis, severe, localized migraines, erythema, which are essentially radiation-like burns on the skin, and massive, unexplainable spikes in heart rate and cortisol.
Dr. Gilbert connects these physiological responses directly to her experience treating severe trauma in civil war zones and refugee camps. When a human being is subjected to a terrifying event over which they have absolutely zero control, an event that completely shatters their fundamental understanding of safety and reality, they develop a psychological condition known as learned helplessness.
Learned helplessness is a profound psychological collapse. It occurs when your brain calculates that no matter what action you take, whether you fight or flee, the outcome will not change. So the nervous system simply shuts down, it gives up.
And Dr. Gilbert observes this learned helplessness not just in the individual witnesses who are paralyzed by fear during an encounter, but in the general public's reaction to the entire UAP topic.
The physical symptoms themselves present a fascinating diagnostic puzzle. When a witness experiences severe nausea and radiation burns, I have to wonder, are these symptoms the result of actual physical energy emanating from the craft?
Like microwave radiation.
Exactly. For instance, non-ionizing microwave radiation from the propulsion system literally cooking the observer's tissues. Or is it purely a psychosomatic response to what sociologists call ontological shock?
Break down the mechanics of ontological shock in this context for us.
Okay, ontological shock is the violent psychological trauma that occurs when your fundamental reality breaks. I compare it to sitting in your living room, fully awake, completely sober in broad daylight, and watching a ghost walk straight through your solid brick wall.
A great analogy.
Your entire worldview, your fundamental predictive model of the universe, is built on the absolute certainty that the dead do not walk through solid matter. But your optic nerves are sending raw data to your visual cortex, stating that it is happening right in front of you.
Right.
Your brain lacks the software to process the hardware's input. The resulting cognitive dissonance is so extreme, so violent, that it causes a physical short circuit in the nervous system. Your body throws up, your muscles freeze in paralysis, your head pounds.
That is exactly what exopsychology seeks to map. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it bridges the gap between the physical reality of the phenomenon and the biological limits of the human perceiver.
Yeah.
It forces us to acknowledge that the human body itself is an unreliable, easily traumatized, but incredibly sensitive instrument.
Yeah.
In this field, the trauma itself is a measurable data point.
The trauma is a data point. Okay, so if we take all of this, if we rigorously strip away the motion parallax, the thermal inversions, the highly classified special access programs, and the foreign espionage drones using psychological camouflage, we are still left with a core, irreducible set of data.
We are.
The Nimitz radar tracks, the transmedium travel, the thousands of Gs, data that defies every single conventional explanation we have. So what are we left with?
We arrive at what the authors themselves describe as a starting, paradigm-shattering conclusion. They suggest that the ultimate truth of this core phenomenon is far more complex and exotic than the simple binary debate we have been trapped in for 70 years.
Right, the debate is almost always a binary. Either it's a secret military drone from Lockheed Martin, or it's an extraterrestrial from another solar system flying here in a tin can.
Hazeltine and Gilbert argue that those binaries, terrestrial versus extraterrestrial, are vastly insufficient. They introduce the intradimensional or ultra-terrestrial hypothesis.
Let's slow down and really define the ultra-terrestrial concept, because it requires a massive leap in how we conceptualize our environment.
The ultra-terrestrial hypothesis proposes that this intelligence, whatever is piloting or controlling these anomalies, might actually be indigenous to our own environment.
Indigenous?
Yes, they might share this planet or this local space with us. But they operate in a manner or exist in a frequency that our current biological senses and our standard technological sensors can only partially, fleetingly perceive.
Let me connect this right back to Dr. Hazeltine's early doctoral research. Remember, he started his career studying the sensory neurophysiology of snakes.
Right, specifically how boas and pythons perceive their environment.
Exactly. Human beings have ocular biology that only allows us to see an incredibly narrow sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum, which we call visible light.
Right.
We cannot see infrared, we cannot see ultraviolet, and we cannot see radio waves. If you put a human in a pitch black room with a mouse, the human sees absolutely nothing. Reality is dark.
Pitch black.
But a snake has specialized pit organs that detect infrared thermal radiation. To the snake, that exact same dark room is brightly lit by the glowing body heat of the mouse. Reality is entirely different depending on the biological hardware processing it.
Which means our human perception of reality is not objective reality. It is just a highly filtered biological interface.
So what does this all mean? It's like hearing a dog whistle. You blow a high-frequency dog whistle, and to human ears, there is absolute silence. Nothing is happening in reality.
Right.
But the dog goes completely crazy because the dog's biology is tuned to receive that higher frequency. Just because our human ears lack the physiological hardware to pick up the frequency doesn't mean the whistle isn't blowing right in our own backyard.
And that is the profoundly humbling synthesis of their research. Our definition of life, our definition of physics, and our perception of reality itself are entirely anthropogenic.
Anthropogenic.
Yes, meaning they are human-constructed frameworks built entirely around human limitations.
We think we are looking at the entire universe, but we are actually just peering through a tiny biological keyhole.
The UAP mystery is ultimately forcing humanity to realize that the universe is immensely layered. There may be complex biologies, entirely different physical dimensions, and vast intelligences existing right alongside us, constantly interacting with our environment, but remaining largely outside our sensory keyhole.
Wow.
What we perceive as a glowing orb or transmedium tic-tac might just be the three-dimensional shadow of something vastly more complex intersecting with our limited slice of reality.
It means the absolute frontier of scientific discovery isn't just out there in deep space, light years away. It's right here.
Yeah.
It's in how we perceive the space immediately surrounding us.
Which leads directly into the author's final recommendations for how we move forward. To solve this, they advocate for a brain-centered approach. We have to fix our sensory and psychological limitations before we can hope to understand what is in the sky.
And step one is aggressively dismantling the stigma. We have to kill the giggle factor. It must become professionally acceptable and even encouraged for commercial pilots, military radar operators, and academic scientists to report and investigate anomalous data without fear of ruining their careers or losing their security clearances.
Exactly. Step two is comprehensive, multidisciplinary sensor integration. We can no longer rely on siloed data. We cannot just look at radar tracks in a vacuum, and we cannot just look at psychological trauma in a vacuum.
We have to combine them.
We must fuse hard physics, optical telemetry, astrobiology, and exopsychology to generate a complete 360-degree holographic picture of these encounters.
But the most empowering concept they present, and this connects directly back to you, the listener, is what they call discovery democracy.
Yes, I love this part.
Dr. Gilbert points out that the general public is currently paralyzed by learned helplessness. We have been conditioned to assume that only the classified military apparatus has the answers, and since they refuse to tell us, there's absolutely nothing we can do.
Hazeltine and Gilbert argue that the government doesn't necessarily have all the answers. They simply have a monopoly on the high-end sensor data. But that monopoly is breaking.
It really is.
The public now possesses its own decentralized sensor network.
Exactly. There are currently billions of smartphones sitting in human pockets all over the globe. These aren't just communication devices. They are high-definition, multi-lens, GPS-tracked, time-stamped optical sensors.
They are.
If everyday citizens actively document and report their sightings to independent open-source scientific databases, we can bypass the classified intelligence silos entirely.
It democratizes the scientific inquiry. By building a transparent, global, civilian-driven database of the anomalous, we provide the ultimate cure for the public's learned helplessness.
You actually have the power to contribute to the most important data pool in human history. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final, brand new concept to chew on. Something that builds on the physiological and psychological limits Hazeltine and Gilbert laid out, but pushes it one step further into the theoretical mechanics of reality itself.
I am highly intrigued. Let's hear it.
We spent this hour talking about how the human brain's expectations shape its perception of reality. The biological firewall, the giggle factor, the rigid predictive engine.
Right.
But if you look at the fundamental principles of modern quantum mechanics, specifically the observer effect, it implies something much stranger. The observer effect demonstrates that the mere act of a conscious human observing a subatomic particle can physically alter the state of that particle.
Yes, the double-slit experiment. It collapses the quantum wave function. A particle remains in a state of probability, a wave of potential, until the act of observation forces it to adopt a definite physical state.
Exactly. So here is my provocative thought. If these UAP phenomena are indeed ultra-terrestrial or interdimensional, if they exist naturally on the blurry quantum edges of our physical reality, could our collective psychological giggle factor be doing far more than just creating social stigma?
Wait, are you saying?
Could our deep-seated biological refusal to accept these anomalies actually be affecting how they physically manifest in our material world?
You are suggesting that our collective consciousness, our rigid institutional denial, acts as a literal physical barrier in space-time.
Yes. Are these intelligences actively hiding from us using advanced stealth cloaking technology? Or is our collective human brain our absolutely rigid anthropogenic expectation of what is allowed to be real, acting as a quantum wall that actively prevents them from fully materializing in our world?
That is wild.
By collapsing the wave function into our narrow comfort zone, are we the ones keeping them out? If we stop laughing, if we finally turn off the biological firewall and open the keyhole, what suddenly becomes visible right in front of our eyes?
That is a staggering implication. It suggests that the muddy, ambiguous waters of this phenomenon aren't just obscuring the truth. Our perception is fundamentally physically interacting with it.
So, tonight I want you to walk outside. Look up at the stars, but try to do it with your predictive filters totally turned off. Look at the night sky, not as an engineer demanding a clean binary answer, but as an explorer, finally willing to step into the muddy, magnificent waters of the great unknown.